All right, team, welcome to another episode of the Exceptional Leadership Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Matt Hamilton, and I am delighted to have your company with me once again. Today, we're going to talk about something called situational leadership theory, which many of you may not have heard of before. But before we get into the nuts and bolts of that theory, what it is and how it works, let's delve into some relatively recent history, all the way back in the early 2000s, to see how situational leadership theory was put into practice. And this time it was by a little company that you might have heard of called Starbucks. Let's have a look. In the early 2000s, Starbucks was riding high. The company was growing rapidly, expanding into new markets across the globe. But as Starbucks grew, it faced a new challenge, and that was how to maintain the culture and the values that had made it so special while managing its scale. Enter Howard Schultz, the man who had already transformed Starbucks from a small coffee shop in Seattle into an international phenomenon. At the time, Schultz had stepped down as the CEO, but he remained involved in the company. He had built Starbucks around the idea that employees, whom they called partners, were at the heart of the brand. Schultz believed that if Starbucks took care of its people, the people would take care of the customers. It was an ethos that had worked for many years, but now, with thousands of stores around the world, it was harder to keep that same close-knit culture alive. Seeing the company's rapid growth, Schultz knew it would take more than just strategy. It would take adapting his leadership style to ensure Starbucks stayed true to its roots. Early on, Schultz leaned into supportive leadership, focusing on ensuring that employees felt valued. During this phase, he introduced a range of benefits such as healthcare, stock options, and more to give partners a sense of ownership in the company. Schultz wasn't just overseeing operations, he was leading with empathy, building a company culture where employees felt invested in the company's success. In doing so, he nurtured the team that would carry Starbucks and the mission forward. But in 2008, the winds of change hit hard. Starbucks had expanded too quickly. The company's core values, quality, customer service, and third-place experience had become diluted. The brand was losing its magic. Schultz was called back as CEO to steer the ship through these troubled waters, and this time he had to lead in a different way. With the company at a crossroads, he knew he had to take a more directive approach. The leadership style that had once worked for a growing brand needed to shift to manage the crisis at hand. Schultz took a step back into the trenches, making tough decisions to realign the company. He ordered the closure of underperforming stores, cut back on new openings, and refocused on product quality and the customer experience. He was hands-on in retraining employees, reminding them of the importance of the Starbucks mission and what made the brand unique, the personal connection between barista and customer. Schultz was telling his team what needed to be done to revitalize the Starbucks experience, and doing it with clarity and precision. It was a tough, directive style of leadership, but it was exactly what Starbucks needed to stabilize. Once the company had regained its footing, Schultz and his leadership style evolved again. He knew that long-term success wasn't about constantly directing from the top. It was about empowering his people. Now that the company was on some solid ground, Schultz began to delegate a little bit more, trusting his leadership team to carry out the vision. The team had grown and matured, and Schultz needed to give them the freedom to innovate and lead in their own right. Starbucks began to experiment with some new initiatives like mobile ordering and the Starbucks app, which helped to bring the company into the digital age. Schultz fostered a culture of innovation, trusting his team to find new ways to enhance the customer experience while maintaining the company's core values. But Schultz didn't just focus on the bottom line, he also led with a greater purpose. As Starbucks became a global brand, Schultz took bold steps to position the company as a leader in social responsibility. He introduced initiatives for ethical sourcing, environmental sustainability, and community engagement. Schultz understood that the world was changing, and he saw Starbucks not just as a coffee company, but as an agent of positive social change. This wasn't just about business success, it was about leading with purpose. Through all these phases, Schultz and his leadership style shifted in response to the challenges at hand. just as situational leadership theory suggests. When the company was growing, he was supportive, nurturing his team and empowering them to succeed. During times of crisis, he took a more directive approach to get things back on track. And as the company stabilized, he evolved into a leader who empowered his team and led with purpose, fostering innovation and social responsibility. Schultz's ability to adapt to the changing needs of the company and the world around it was a key reason for Starbucks' resilience. By aligning his leadership with the needs of the organization, he not only steered Starbucks through some difficult times, but also helped it emerge stronger with a renewed sense of purpose and direction. Now that's an interesting example, isn't it, from the real world, and quite a thorough example, I think, of how you need to adjust your approach depending on the situation, which is what leadership requires if it's to be done well. And this is one of the reasons I liked situational leadership theory so much. When I first heard of it, it seemed a little funny to me to sort of put it into theory format because it just seemed like common sense. It makes sense that not everybody responds to the same thing, and so that you have to adjust your technique and methods to meet the needs of the people involved. But I think it is probably worthwhile to have it written down in a structured format, because sometimes in the messiness that we experience with leading people, it can be nice to come back to a little bit of stability and structure. So a couple of thoughts in regards to situational leadership theory, and the first one is that obviously everybody's different. Now, if you've been around for any length of time, in the workplace, outside of the workplace, you'll know that different personalities respond to different things. So, of course, it makes sense that we don't just go into a situation as a leader and just use the same techniques regardless of the personality. I've had all shapes and sizes under my leadership over the years. I've had people that are really emotionally stable. I've had people that are absolute basket cases, and I've had people that are somewhere in between. I've had people that will be fantastic one day and then just, inconsolable heap the next. And that sort of happened on a regular basis, all right? So I've been put through the ringer with this, and I've seen it working in real time. And after it's been tried and tested over the years, you get a little bit of confidence, I suppose, in this approach. And what I love about it is that it gives us the agility to adapt, right, regardless of the situation. And I don't think there's anything better as a leader. If you are unable to adapt to changing times and circumstances as a leader, you're going to have a really, really difficult time doing a good job. So we've got to be constantly alert that what might be required of us day to day, month to month, year to year will change depending on the situation. Now that could be due to individual people that we're managing. It could then, up at another level, be due to new strategic initiatives that our organisation is looking to implement, which will require different skills, traits and techniques from us as leaders to implement. And I think the Starbucks example was a great example of how that situational leadership theory was applied not only at an individual one-to-one level, manager to employee, but also in response to broader organisational initiatives. So it really is quite flexible and can be used at all levels. Now, the other thing I wanted to talk about was don't underestimate the benefit of certainty and structure. I'm a person who likes structure. I like to have a plan in place. I like to have techniques that I can go to use. I just like structure. Other people are a little more happy to wing it, but that's not me. So what I love about this theory is that it gives you a very definitive process to follow. Okay, and what I'll do is on the Instagram page, I'll post a nice little diagram that illustrates what I'm talking about from a structure perspective. You might have someone who requires a really directive approach and a really supportive approach at the same time. That might be someone who's low on competence, for example, bit green, doesn't really know the job. They need you to tell them what to do step by step. And also because they're brand new and lacking that confidence, you've got to give them a lot of support as well. Then you might have at the other end of the scale, someone who is super confident and doesn't really need a lot of support either. They're just happy to sort of be pointed in the right direction, told what we want to achieve, and then you just let them go because they've got great competence and they know what they're doing. You don't need to helicopter over people like that. So there's an example of two situations that you can probably recall off the top of your head, having been put into and experienced. The other one that I like to come back to is coaching. Okay, there's a part of situational leadership theory that is dedicated towards the coaching sort of mindset, which I'm a big fan of as a leader. Now that might be someone, for example, and you can think of all sorts of situations with this, perhaps someone who is actually really high on competence. They're clearly very good at what they do and they have all the potential in the world, but maybe they need a bit of support. Maybe they need support because just emotionally they're not as stable as we'd like them to be. And that could be due to lacking confidence, for example. So really competent, but not emotionally in tune with their abilities. Maybe they doubt themselves. Maybe they need to be reassured. Maybe they're really high in competence, but have joined a new organization, and so they're still trying to find their feet. That's a great example of a situation where as a leader, you need to recognize that and go, okay, this person just needs a little bit of emotional support from me, not because they're not competent at what they're doing, but because I need to make sure that they can be safe from an emotional perspective until they build that confidence, until they get their feet under them. I know they're good at what they do. I just need to get them through to the other side of that, that honeymoon sort of period. All right. So there's a couple of practical examples. I'll post up on the Instagram page a visual of what that looks like. Go and have a look, and I will reference the website where I've picked the diagram from, and you can go and visit it, maybe print it out, keep it on your desk, keep it in your drawer, use it as something that you refer to remind yourself that as a leader you need to be flexible, you need to be agile, we need to be ready to move at all times and ready to lead in a variety of different situations and scenarios. All right, guys, I hope that helps. Let's leave it there. What I will do is direct your attention to the show notes, as I do at the end of every episode. But there is a link in the show notes right at the very top, and it says send us a text. And what that enables you to do is communicate with me directly, all right? If you send a text using that link, it will hit me up via email, and that means that we can have some really good interaction. I can perhaps answer one of your questions on the show, give you a shout out if you'd like that. Maybe hear about some challenges that you've got on your plate if you just want to have a bit of a vent. I'd love to interact with you and learn about what challenges you're dealing with as a leader. So hit me up on that link and I'd be very happy to hear from you. Of course, guys, all the usual stuff, whatever app you listen to your podcast on, leave us a great review, subscribe to the show so that you get updates as they come through, and give us a follow on the Instagram page as well if you want access to more content like reels and posts and things like that. And finally, if you really want to take it next level, jump on to that LinkedIn link, which is in the show notes, and join the Exceptional Leadership Community of Practice. That's a really good little tool because you will essentially have access to a bunch of professionals that I have worked with and curated over the years. And in that forum, what I'd like to do is make it possible for you to ask questions of those people, okay? I'll post some things up there that are of educational benefit, and hopefully we can all benefit from a networking and also a knowledge sharing perspective. All right, guys, that's it. Until next time, I'll see you later.